Hello, welcome to the interview here on France 24. Well, time was not so long ago that Vladimir Putin was threatening to overthrow Georgia's president, Mikhail Saakashvili, and as Putin put it, hang him by the balls. Now, that was August 2008. Russian troops were rolling into Georgian territory. Some feared they had their sights on the capital, Tbilisi. Just over 5 years later, that brief war is a bitter but receding memory. Georgians have just elected a new president, while the country's outgoing prime minister, billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili, has sought to reduce tensions with Moscow. However, Russian troops do remain stationed in two northern enclaves that Georgia claims as its own. Now, Moscow's anything, meanwhile, but happy about Georgia's own efforts to align itself more closely with the European Union and NATO. Can Georgia warm up to Moscow, mend relations, even as it reaches out to the West? That's one of the questions I'm putting today to my guest, Irakli Alasanya. Welcome to our show. You are Georgia's defense minister, but you've also worn many other hats in the past. You were the country's representative to the United Nations during that five-day war in August 2008. You subsequently, right after that war, you were critical of the way your government handled the conflict, and you actively entered politics in the opposition, and today you are a member of the new Georgia Dream Coalition, which has came to power last year. Welcome to the show. I want to start with that war. I know it was 5 years ago. Putin's no longer saying he wants to hang Georgia's leaders by the balls, but as we just said, there are still Russian troops stationed on 20% of your country's territory. What you say is your country's territory. That's not going to change anytime soon, is it?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. It's my first official visit to the France, and I just wanted to thank French public and the leadership for the assistance and help they provided 5 years ago. Through your country's leadership, we were able...
Nicolas Sarkozy was a key player in the negotiations.
It was critical to end this conflict at that time, and we are very grateful to French people, and thank you for that. Now, 5 years since the war, Georgia is still standing tall. We consolidated all the democratic gains in the past administrations, and we are now actually in the making of new Georgian history. Just a few weeks ago, we had a very democratic, open and transparent elections, which was actually applauded in the West as a very democratic.
And the longtime presidents agreed to step down and hand over power.
So the transfer of power happened. So Georgia now is eyeing very closely for the future that we have identified ourselves with the Europe. So this is still moving on, which means that Georgia survived the war with Russia.
You survived,
Of course, you're saying that there are still Russian troops on our territories. This is our territories because the international community never accepted the forceful change of the border by Russian Federation. But we understand it will take a time for us to regain legitimately control over these territories.
How does the new government do this on a practical level? Russia is right there. It's your immediate neighbor and a very big neighbor. Europe's way over here, out to the west, much further away, as is the United States. Doesn't the priority just geostrategically have to be Russia?
I would disagree. Georgia's public and people have already voted and choose to be part of Europe. And this is why our path to European Union, to Euro-Atlantic community, NATO, is irreversible. This is very obvious to everybody. But at the same time, the new government, Bidzina Ivanishvili, the prime minister,
who's
and
outgoing
all of us decided that we have to have pragmatic, very cool-headed view towards Russia. We understand that Russia will not change its policy towards our territorial integrity or our aspiration to join NATO soon. But this is in our interest to start opening the relationship on trade, on cultural relationship, which will decrease the polarization. And when the polarization will be decreased, we're going to have more space to deal with Abkhaz and Ossetians, to make them understand that the future in Europe together with us will be better for them than to stay under the occupation.
Could you just explain, help me understand, and our viewers as well, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, these are the two enclaves we're talking about,
right,
which are Georgian territory from your standpoint.
And the international community standpoint
And the
as well.
international community standpoint. Who's living there right now? Because as I remember, there were tens of thousands of people displaced from their homes in those disputed areas when the Russians came in 2008. Who's there now? What's the population?
Well, ethnic cleansing was happening there from the early 90s. not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of Georgians with ethnic cleansed. And this is why international community is supporting very openly and declaratively that the refugees and IDPs has to have the right to go back. But now we have the situation when the ethnic Georgians are out of there, and we're negotiating openly with the Abkhaz and Ossetians that we want to live together, and this is why we have to negotiate seriously about the future of Georgian IDPs.
So there are you were the former peace envoy. Saakashvili chose you as a peace envoy to Abkhazia, to their secessionist government at the time. Are there still those types of peace talks going on? Is there contact?
Yes, it's one of those talks was happening just a few days ago in Geneva. We have a format in Geneva where we're talking with the Abkhaz and Ossetians together with Russians and other international community members. At the same time, Georgian government and Prime Minister Ivanishvili appointed his special envoy, the very seasoned ambassador and experienced diplomat, to talk with Russians on trade and cultural related issues.
Okay.
So our main goal is not to give any pretext to Russians to attack us politically or otherwise, have this space to develop ourselves, develop institutions, and getting ready to be future members of NATO and European Union. And when historical opportunity will open up, we're going to become the members of the European community.
And I will mention that recently Moscow did lift its ban, I believe, on imports of Georgian wine and mineral water, right? Which the Russians love.
So this is why we feel that it is in our all best interest to have normalized relationship with Russia. But unfortunately, so far, Russians are proving to be very insensitive towards legitimate rights of local Georgian population. What was happening for past months on the borderline of occupied lines, borderization, barbed wires, separating families and people from each other. This is really the old Cold War mentality. We want to end this. This is why our pragmatic approach, I think, will prove to be productive.
Russia sees it as a provocative act, even slightly threatening, to see Georgia, one of the former Soviet republics. It sees you as its sphere of influence, I suppose, to use an old term, reaching out so much to the West. Do you understand those concerns when Russia expresses them?
First of all, I want to look at the history. Russians were opposing the expansion of the NATO to the east. The Russians were against the Baltic state joining NATO, but it happened because the resilience of the public in Baltic states, as well the resilience of Georgian people, who is supporting the integration to NATO over 75%, this will happen. We're actually building our state, we're building our institutions, and as NATO is saying, we're going to be provided another instruments of integration, because we are now providing security for the European community as well. We are the #1 troop contributors.
You are right, in
per capita in Afghanistan. So we are proud that we're fighting shoulder to shoulder to safeguard our values together with France, European and other allies. This is why Georgia is now making the difference. Georgia is trusted. Georgia is a credible partner and will remain like this.
NATO is, as you know, winding down slowly its operations in Afghanistan, wants to pull out by the end of 2014. Does this concern Georgia? Do you see that the West is perhaps shifting its attention from this region? It's trying to sort of move on to other parts of the world that they consider more important right now?
Well, I think the European Union and NATO countries are still very focused on Georgia. I mean, elections that happened just a few weeks ago is another demonstration, and Georgia is profoundly democratic nation. We're building our institutions, and not without the help of France and other allies. So this is the success model. Georgia is looked up in the region as a success. This is why we need the validation of the success from the other part, European part as well. This is why we're looking forward for the Vilnius summit, when initialing of our association agreement with Europe will be there, and next year's summit to NATO, because Georgia is actually reforming, contributing, performing, and maturing its political system. And we are the partners and viable, trusted partners of Europe.
Very much still on that Europe-NATO path. However, your neighbors as well, it's a volatile region, no one's going to dispute. Armenia, Azerbaijan, there are a lot of problems right now people are worried about in that area, especially Nagorno-Karabakh, an enclave within Azerbaijan itself and Armenia. Are you ever scared about the just spillover throughout the region of a conflict like that?
Well, I'm going to tell you that I know people in Armenia and Azerbaijan. Georgia is blessed to have wonderful relationship with both countries, historically. And we have strategic partnership with Azerbaijan, Turkey, and neighborly relationship with Armenia. I would say the assumption is very exaggerated who are saying that the threat is imminent of the confrontation. I think that the development projects that are going in the region, together with Azerbaijan, their developments, they know that it will be threatened if the violence will break out. So I think Georgia has a good potential in future to be the convening power of the regional countries who are not getting along with each other. Georgia will use these capabilities for the better of the region.
Very, very briefly, running out of time here, do you see the possibility of another eruption of a war with Russia?
Clearly, I want to expand our commitment that Georgia will never give any pretext to anybody in the region and in Russia as well to have another escalation, but we'll be ready to defend ourselves.
Irakli Alesanya, Georgian defense minister here in Paris on the first official visit by Georgia defense minister. Thank you very much for spending a little bit of time to talk about a very complicated region and your country's changes right now, changing president and changing prime minister.
Pleasure was mine. Thanks
for being our guest, and thanks to all of you for watching the interview here on France 24.